Listen closely. Down the hill. 2 words, captured almost by accident on a 14-year-old's cell phone in the final minutes of her life. For over 5 years, that 10-second clip, and the blurry image of a man walking across an old railroad bridge, was the closest thing an entire country had to an answer. A man, a bridge, 2 girls who never made it home. Thousands of amateur investigators pored over every frame. Podcasts were built entirely around this one case. Reward money climbed into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And for years, the man in that video had a nickname, but no name at all. This is the story of Abby Williams and Libby German, 2 best friends who did nothing more than go for a hike on their day off school, and the 8-year odyssey it took to get them justice. The setup and the timeline. Delphi, Indiana sits about 70 miles north of Indianapolis. It's the kind of place people mean when they say small-town America, a population just over 3,000, 1 stoplight downtown, a community where kids ride bikes to the gas station and everyone waves at everyone. Running along the edge of town is the Delphi Historic Trail System, a network of walking paths that follow an old canal and a defunct rail line. The centerpiece is the Monon High Bridge, a towering, abandoned railroad trestle spanning a deep, wooded ravine. It had been closed to trains for decades, but locals walked across it constantly. Teenagers especially loved it. It was scenic, a little bit forbidden, and totally familiar. February 13th, 2017 was a Monday, but school was out for a teacher in service day. 2 8th graders, best friends Abby Williams, 13, and Libby German, 14, decided to spend their unexpected day off doing something they'd done many times before, hiking the trail and taking pictures at the bridge. Libby's older sister dropped the girls off at the trailhead a little after 1 p.m. The plan was casual, almost mundane: walk the bridge, snap some photos for social media, and get picked up later that afternoon. No one thought twice about it. This was routine. At 2:07 p.m., Libby posted a photograph to Snapchat. It shows Abby, walking just ahead of her, crossing the wooden planks of the old bridge, backlit by the winter afternoon sun. It is, as far as anyone has ever been able to determine, the last photograph either girl ever took. Sometime after that photo, something happened. What exactly, no one can say with total certainty even now, but in the minutes that followed, Libby appears to have sensed danger and made a decision that would ultimately crack the entire case. She started recording. By 3:15 p.m., the girls' scheduled pickup came and went with no one there to meet it. Phones rang unanswered. Texts went unread. As the sun went down and the temperature dropped, worry turned into panic, and panic turned into a call to police. By nightfall on February 13th, Delphi had transformed. Volunteer searchers, ultimately hundreds of them, some driving in from neighboring counties, fanned out across the trail system with flashlights and search dogs, combing the ravines and brush along the Monon High Bridge through the freezing overnight hours. The search resumed at first light on February 14th. Just before noon, searchers located the girls' bodies in a wooded area on private property, roughly half a mile from the bridge itself. They had been placed close together, partially concealed with sticks and branches. The scene told investigators 2 things immediately. This had not been a random accident, and whoever was responsible had spent time at that location after the girls died. What officially happened to Abby and Libby between that final Snapchat photo at 2:07 p.m. and the discovery of their bodies the next day would go on to become one of the most exhaustively picked-apart mysteries in the history of American true crime. The investigation, the sketches, and the dead ends. In the days after the murders, Indiana State Police faced an investigator's nightmare: 2 victims, an isolated crime scene, and almost no physical trail to follow. There were no confirmed eyewitnesses to the crime itself, no obvious motive, no forced entry or break-in to trace back to a suspect. It looked on its surface like the kind of case that goes cold within a year and stays that way forever. But investigators had one enormous advantage, and it came from the victims themselves. Libby's phone, recovered at the scene, contained a video her killer never knew existed. Roughly 43 seconds of footage and audio, apparently recorded in secret as a man approached the girls on the bridge. In it, investigators say, is a single chilling command. "Down the hill, guys." That phrase, whispered into a phone hidden from view by a terrified 14-year-old, would become the backbone of the entire investigation. 5 months later, in July 2017, police released their first composite sketch of a suspect, created with an FBI forensic artist based on witness descriptions of a man seen on and around the trail that day. The description: a white male, reddish-brown hair, between 5'6" and 5'10", weighing somewhere between 180 and 220 pounds. Police asked the public to study his face. Tips poured in by the thousands. None of them led anywhere. Then, in April 2019, more than 2 years after the murders, police made an unusual move. They released a second sketch. This one showed a noticeably younger-looking man, along with newly enhanced audio and video from Libby's phone. Investigators were careful to clarify. This was not necessarily a different rendering of the same first sketch. It may represent a different look at the same suspect, based on new analysis. They urged the public to look for someone who might be hiding in plain sight in the Delphi community itself. Online, the case exploded into a genuine phenomenon. Amateur sleuths built entire message boards dissecting every pixel of the bridge video. True crime podcasts devoted hundreds of episodes to the case. Names of local men were floated, accused, and investigated by internet detectives with no evidence beyond a passing resemblance to a sketch, ruining reputations in the process, and sending police chasing false leads that ate up years of manpower. One lead in particular consumed enormous public attention. In December 2021, investigators revealed they were looking into a fake social media persona called Anthony Shots, an account that had posed as a wealthy young male model to message underage girls, and which, it turned out, had been in contact with Libby German shortly before her death. The account was traced to a Miami County, Indiana man named Keegan Klein. Klein was arrested in 2020, not for the murders, but on more than 30 charges related to child exploitation and solicitation involving the same fake account. To be clear, Klein was never charged and never officially named a suspect. In the deaths of Abby and Libby, police pursued the lead exhaustively, but it never became the break the case needed. Years kept passing. 2017 became 2018. 2018 became 2019, then 2020, then 2021. Investigators quietly kept working the case behind the scenes even as public attention cycled between obsession and frustration. For families in Delphi, birthdays and holidays came and went with no resolution, just a blurry face on a wanted poster that seemed to belong to no one. Then, in the fall of 2022, everything changed, and the reason it changed was almost mundane. Investigators re-examining old tips discovered that a report involving a local man had been overlooked years earlier, due to what's been described as a clerical error. That man was Richard Allen, a married father in his 50s who worked at a nearby CVS pharmacy and lived less than 5 miles from the crime scene. Allen, it turned out, had actually come forward to police back in 2017, telling them he'd been on the trail that day. His account had simply been filed away and never fully cross-checked. On October 26, 2022, 5 years, 8 months, and 13 days after the murders, police arrested Richard Allen. The news landed in Delphi like a shockwave. This wasn't a stranger, a drifter passing through, or some anonymous figure from an internet sketch. Allen was a familiar face, the kind of man who might have rung up your groceries or nodded to you at a little league game. For a town that had spent years imagining a monster from the outside, the idea that the answer had been living quietly among them the entire time was almost harder to process than the murders themselves. The trial, the verdict, and what came after. The physical evidence tying Allen to the scene came down to a single, remarkably small piece of proof, an unspent bullet found on the ground between the girls' bodies. Forensic firearms examiners matched microscopic tool marks on that cartridge to a specific handgun, a Sig Sauer pistol recovered from Allen's own home during a search. Allen confirmed it was his gun. He had never reported it lost, stolen, or missing. But the case's most disturbing evidence didn't come from a lab. It came from inside a prison cell. While Alan sat in pretrial detention, held in isolation for his own safety, he began confessing. Not once, but repeatedly. To his wife, to his mother, to a treating psychologist, to prison guards, to fellow inmates. Investigators say he confessed to the murders more than 60 separate times over roughly 2 years. Several of those conversations were recorded and played for the jury. Alan's defense team didn't deny the recordings existed. They attacked their reliability. They argued Alan was suffering a severe mental health crisis behind bars, that he'd been placed on suicide watch, medicated, and psychologically deteriorating in isolation, and that a man in that state cannot be trusted to accurately confess to anything, let alone a double murder. It set up one of the strangest evidentiary battles in recent memory. The defendant's own words, used simultaneously as the prosecution's most powerful weapon and the defense's central argument for reasonable doubt. The defense also tried to introduce an alternate theory entirely, arguing that Abby and Libby had actually been killed in a ritualistic act carried out by followers of Odinism, a Norse pagan religion the defense claimed had been co-opted by white nationalist groups. They pointed to sticks and branches found arranged on the girls' bodies as possible ritual staging, and asked to name nearly a dozen alternate suspects tied to that theory. The trial judge ultimately ruled against allowing it, finding the defense had failed to establish any direct evidentiary link between Odinism, those alternate suspects, and the actual crime. The jury never heard that theory at all. Richard Allen's trial finally began on October 18, 2024, nearly 8 years after the murders. Over more than 17 days of testimony, prosecutors built their case around 3 pillars: the ballistics match, the confessions, and witness testimony placing a man matching Allen's description on the trail that afternoon. On November 11, 2024, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all 4 counts. 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felony murder. Outside the Carroll County Courthouse, a community that had waited nearly 8 years for an answer finally allowed itself to exhale. The following month, in December 2024, the judge handed down the maximum possible sentence: 130 years in prison, 65 years for each girl, to be served consecutively. At the sentencing hearing, Libby's grandmother spoke directly to Allen for the first time, telling him she hoped he would live the rest of his life with the same fear he had caused the girls in the final hour of theirs. That was not the end of the legal story, though. Allen's attorneys immediately filed an appeal, maintaining his innocence and arguing the confessions should never have been admitted at trial in the first place. As of now, that appeal remains active in the Indiana court system, with additional case exhibits, including material related to the Odinism theory, still being reviewed. For nearly 8 years, Bridge Guy was a shadow, a blurry photograph, a whispered command, a nickname instead of a name. Today, he has a face, a conviction, and a cell number. But no verdict, no sentence, and no explanation can undo what was taken on a hiking trail 2 best friends knew like the back of their hands. Abby Williams was 13 years old. Libby German was 14. They deserve to be remembered as exactly that: 2 best friends who went for a walk on a day off school, not simply as the names attached to a mystery that took the world 8 years to solve.